The small town of Honeydew in Northern California had always been a place of quiet seclusion, nestled among towering redwoods and dense, mist-covered forests. Its residents were few, and most lived off the grid, far from the bustling noise of the cities. It was a peaceful place where everyone knew each other and the rhythm of life moved slowly, until the day the Stewart family disappeared. It was a chilly Saturday in December 1977 when Mary Elizabeth Stewart, a 32-year-old mother of two, packed her children, 2-year-old Jessie Flo and 1-year-old Fanny Fawn, into their family car, a red Opel station wagon for a routine trip into town. With a list of errands to run, groceries to buy, and a portable television that needed fixing, Mary set off from the Stewart family's isolated homestead, located deep in the rugged mountains of Humboldt County, California. That morning, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The family had no reason to believe that this would be the last time they would be seen alive. Yet, by nightfall, Mary and her children had failed to return home. The town was silent, but within the quiet, a creeping unease began to grow. As the hours turned into days, the dread mounted. It became clear that something was terribly wrong. What started as a routine trip to town soon spiraled into one of the most perplexing and eerie disappearances in California's history. A case that left behind more questions than answers. Part 2. The disappearance of the Stewart family. The days passed, and the sense of dread grew stronger with every passing hour. Byron Stewart had always been a man of routine, a man who knew how to handle hardship, but this was different. Something in his gut twisted with unease as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, and still, there was no sign of his wife, Mary, or their two daughters, Jessie and Fanny. Mary was always punctual, always reliable. She'd promised to return by evening, but now, as the darkness crept into their remote homestead, Byron's anxiety began to churn into something much darker, something much more primal. The forest that surrounded their home, which once felt like a haven, now felt suffocating, pressing in on him with a menacing weight. The rustling of the trees in the wind sounded almost like whispers, eerie and unfamiliar. Byron tried to stay calm. Perhaps Mary had simply encountered some delay in town. After all, the roads from Honeydew to Fortuna and Eureka were rough. The dirt paths were winding, treacherous, especially in the early days of December when winter still had a way of sneaking into the bones of the land. He called a few neighbors, wondering if anyone had seen the red Opel station wagon or heard from Mary. The answers came back with a sharp emptiness. No one had seen a thing. Something in the pit of his stomach, something far darker than worry, began to take root. Maybe it was his instinct, honed from years of living in the wilderness, but Byron had lived long enough to know that when things didn't feel right, they rarely were. He stood at the front door of their small homestead, staring out into the cold embrace of the night, the wind carrying a sense of dread that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He waited and waited. But by the time the second evening passed and Mary and the girls still hadn't returned, Byron knew something was horribly wrong. The silence that blanketed their home was suffocating, the absence of the usual sounds of his daughters playing, the quiet hum of daily life, felt like an omen. The forest, which had always offered comfort, now seemed like a vast and uncaring expanse, stretching endlessly in all directions, swallowing the very breath from his lungs. The next morning, with no sign of Mary and no word from the town, Byron's unease morphed into something more urgent. He couldn't wait any longer. The sheriff's office was alerted, and soon, search teams were dispatched to comb the winding, often impassable roads that Mary and the girls might have taken. The forest swallowed their efforts with the same insidious silence that had gripped Byron's heart. By the third day, the hope that Mary and the children were merely delayed had begun to fade. A missing persons report was filed, and deputies and volunteers scoured the roads, rivers, and trails they thought the family might have traveled. The land around Honeydew, vast and isolated, was often impassable, but that didn't stop the searchers. Neighbors, friends, and even local volunteers joined in the hunt, but each step they took only seemed to deepen the mystery. Despite the exhaustive search, no sign of the family emerged. No tracks in the dirt, no broken branches, no car parts strewn along the road. The ground had swallowed their every trace, leaving only a cold, empty void behind. Byron remained frantic, a shell of the man he had once been. Desperation clouded his thoughts, but there was one nagging question that lingered at the back of his mind. Where could they have gone? The small, tight-knit community of Honeydew had always been so quiet, so safe. People didn't disappear here, not like this. But here they were, a family torn apart, without a single clue to explain their absence. The sheriff's office, along with the volunteers, continued their search for days. They scoured every inch of the roads Mary could have taken, even venturing deep into the forest to areas no one had ever thought to investigate before. But it was as if the earth itself had swallowed the Stewart family whole, leaving no trace behind. The trees stood like silent sentinels, watching over the land, but they held no answers. The lack of evidence, the absence of any kind of clue, began to erode the hope that had initially driven the search. It was as if Mary, Jessie, and Fanny had vanished into thin air. No tire tracks in the dirt, no indication of a breakdown, no signs of struggle, nothing. It was as though they had stepped out of the car, walked into the woods, and disappeared. The authorities began to turn their attention to the family's home life, suspecting that perhaps there had been a domestic issue that led to this sudden disappearance. But there was no sign of any such conflict, no history of violence, no evidence of abuse. Mary was a devoted mother, and Byron, though known for his temper, had always been protective of his family. Byron's behavior during this period became erratic. He began to speak of strange theories, far-fetched ideas that his wife and daughters hadn't been taken by anyone human. He began to mention things like alien abductions, as though he was searching for an explanation outside of the realm of the possible. His obsession with the disappearance drove him deeper into a kind of madness, and the community that had once known him as a volatile but dependable man began to view him with suspicion. Was he hiding something? Had he known more about what had happened than he let on? The questions, like the endless woods around Honeydew, seemed to stretch on without end. But despite all the probing, all the investigation, nothing concrete came from it. Byron's increasing instability only added to the growing mystery. Subscribe to Whispers in the Dark. If you found this case as perplexing and chilling as I have, don't forget to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark. By subscribing, you'll be supporting our channel and giving us the motivation to continue exploring the mysteries that lurk in the shadows. This is only the beginning, and there are more haunting tales to come. Join us on this journey where every twist and turn keeps us on the edge of our seats. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Part 3. The Strange Discovery, a Clue in the Wilderness. As the search for the missing Stewart family continued, hope seemed to dwindle with each passing day. The authorities and volunteers had scoured every inch of the surrounding roads, the backwoods, and even the nearby creeks. It felt as though the land itself was conspiring to keep the family's whereabouts a secret. No sign of the red Opel station wagon, no footprints, not even a shred of evidence that would point to where Mary, Jessie, and Fanny might have gone. But on January 19, 1978, more than a month after their disappearance, A breakthrough came, not in the form of a person, but a car. A local surveyor, conducting work along a forgotten logging road just a few miles from the Stewart homestead, came across an unexpected sight. There, hidden among the thick ferns and undergrowth, was the red Opel station wagon. The car, its once bright paint now caked in layers of dirt and grime, sat abandoned on the overgrown trail. It had been positioned in such a way that it almost seemed deliberately concealed, tucked out of sight in a remote part of the forest, far from the regular paths that Mary would have traveled. The moment the surveyor spotted the car, his heart skipped a beat. He immediately radioed for assistance. Authorities were notified, and soon a team of investigators arrived at the site, their boots crunching over the dry earth as they made their way through the dense woods. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding as they approached the abandoned vehicle, the scene eerily quiet save for the distant rustling of the trees in the wind. Upon inspection, the car told a strange and unsettling story. The doors were still intact, the windows rolled up, and the keys were nowhere to be found, but the contents of the vehicle were deeply perplexing. Inside, the investigators found Mary's purse, untouched, sitting neatly on the passenger seat. There were groceries, cans of vegetables, a loaf of bread, and a carton of milk, all left in a half-finished state, spoiled by the passing time. A basket of laundry, neatly folded and still fresh from the wash, sat in the back seat along with a few toys. Nothing seemed out of place except for one thing: the family was nowhere to be found. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass. It was as if the family had simply vanished from their own vehicle without a trace. The only disruption was the car itself, sitting there, lifeless and abandoned, deep in the woods where it shouldn't have been. The car had been parked at a strange angle, not one that would have been typical for a car pulled off the road. It was as though it had been deliberately placed there, hidden from sight. What was even more unsettling, however, was what was found in the back of the car. A portable television, one that Mary had intended to have repaired, sat in the cargo area. Strangely, the television was now working perfectly, and yet no repair shop in the area had any record of it being brought in. How had it been fixed? And more importantly, who had done it? This bizarre clue suggested that, at some point, the Stewart family had come into contact with someone they hadn't planned to meet, someone who had worked on the television without anyone knowing. The questions piled up, unanswered. Why had Mary, with her two young daughters, chosen to take this obscure and overgrown road? What had happened between the last stop and this place? And why had they left their car in such an odd position, so carefully hidden away? Despite the discovery of the car, the investigation had little to go on. No evidence pointed to a clear explanation of what had happened to the family. The gas tank had been drained, and the fuel line had been cut. An odd and mysterious act, possibly intentional but without a clear motive. Was this an act of sabotage, or simply a sign of a vehicle running out of gas in the middle of nowhere? No one could say for sure. The surrounding area was searched again, but no new evidence emerged. The trees stood tall and silent, as if the forest itself was hiding something it didn't want to be found. No tracks, no other vehicles, just the eerie stillness that hung heavily in the air. Byron, who had been desperately searching for answers, now found himself deep in the heart of a mystery that seemed unsolvable. His wife and children had vanished without a trace, and now the discovery of the car only raised more questions. There was no sign of foul play at the scene. There were no witnesses, no reason to believe anyone had been involved, yet something clearly had happened. The simple act of leaving the car behind, so carefully hidden, felt like the actions of someone trying to leave a clue, but what was it? As weeks passed, the case slowly grew cold again. The sheriff's office and local law enforcement had no leads. There were theories, of course. Some suggested that Mary had deliberately staged her family's disappearance. Others suspected that someone else might have been involved, perhaps a stranger, or someone familiar with the area, who had taken advantage of their vulnerability. But none of these theories offered any concrete evidence. The disappearance of Mary Stewart and her daughters, Jessie and Fanny, would go on to haunt the small community of Honeydew, California, forever. Over time, the case slipped from the public eye, overshadowed by the many mysteries that often occur in the deep, remote woods of Northern California. Yet for those who remembered, the sight of that red Opal station wagon, abandoned and alone in the wilderness, would forever serve as a chilling reminder that some mysteries are never solved. Part 4. The final clue, the unanswered questions. Months passed after the discovery of the Stewart family's car, and the chilling mystery surrounding their disappearance deepened. The authorities, as well as local volunteers, had exhausted all leads. The forests of Northern California, stretching vast and silent, held no more answers. The haunting scene of the red Opal station wagon, still intact, still eerily untouched, lingered in the minds of everyone who had been involved in the investigation. Yet the missing family was nowhere to be found, and the questions continued to echo unanswered. Byron Stewart, Mary's husband, had become a man divided, torn between hope and despair. His world, once filled with the quiet peace of rural life, was now overshadowed by the agony of uncertainty. Each new day brought with it a new wave of questions that gnawed at his very core. What had happened to his wife? His children? Had they left willingly, or had something sinister intervened? Despite the months that passed, Byron never truly gave up. He spent sleepless nights at the local diner, piecing together the fragments of their lives and speaking to anyone who might have seen something. He revisited the places they had frequented, retraced the roads Mary had driven, hoping to find some sign, any sign of where they might have gone. His obsession with the case grew, and it began to consume him. People in the small town of Honeydew started to whisper. They had seen Byron's erratic behavior. His stories were inconsistent, his explanations strange. He was fixated, unable to escape the grip of his family's disappearance. As weeks turned into months, new developments in the case were few and far between. The only thing that seemed to change was the way people began to look at Byron. He had become the prime suspect in the case, a figure who seemed to have more questions than answers. The police began to investigate his past, looking for any signs of possible foul play or even some underlying motive. They learned of his history, his volatile temper, the whispers of violence that had followed him for years. Some speculated that he might have been involved in the disappearance, but others, including Byron himself, were adamant that he had nothing to do with it. The town began to turn against him. Neighbors no longer offered friendly glances. They avoided him when he walked down the street. His reputation as a hot-headed, unpredictable man seemed to have confirmed the suspicions of those who now saw him as the likely culprit. Byron was a man who, by all accounts, had nothing left but questions and isolation. His life, once centered around his family, was now shattered by the unrelenting mystery of their disappearance. On a cold, mist-filled evening in early spring, a breakthrough came. A hiker, wandering through the thick woods near the lost logging road, stumbled upon something that would ignite a new phase in the investigation. The discovery was small, a few inches of metal glinting in the underbrush. At first, the hiker thought it was a discarded piece of garbage, but when he got closer, the unmistakable shape of a keychain came into view. He picked it up, brushing off the dirt. The keychain was ordinary in appearance, just a small trinket with a simple leather strap and a decorative charm. But it had a distinct design, something that immediately caught the hiker's attention. It wasn't a common design. It was unique, something that seemed too personal. And when he looked closer, he realized something even more chilling. There, etched into the metal charm, was the letter M. The hiker's heart raced. This was no ordinary find. It wasn't just a discarded piece of junk, nor was it an ordinary keychain. The M was far too significant. It was likely a personal possession, and the question echoed in his mind. Could it belong to Mary Stewart? Was this a clue? The hiker, shaken by his discovery, immediately contacted the authorities. Within hours, investigators arrived at the scene, and the keychain was taken into evidence. As they combed through the area, they found no other evidence, no footprints, no further clues. But the keychain left them with a new and unsettling realization. Someone or something had to have been near the woods, possibly close to where the Stewart family had disappeared. The discovery of the keychain stirred up new hope in the investigation, but it also brought forth even more terrifying questions. Why had it been left here? Who had dropped it? And how had it ended up miles away from the Stewart family's car? As the investigation took a turn, another unsettling possibility began to creep into the minds of those involved. Some theorized that the Stewarts had been kidnapped. They had been taken by someone who was familiar with the area, someone who knew the remote paths and the logging roads that wound deep into the wilderness. Whoever had taken them had left behind nothing but small traces, clues that led in circles and ultimately to nowhere. But even as new theories began to develop, there was a disturbing silence surrounding the case. Investigators, now suspicious of everyone and everything, turned to Byron Stewart. His past had raised red flags, and his increasingly erratic behavior only fueled suspicion. It was clear that he was deeply shaken by the disappearance, but could it be possible that he had orchestrated it all? Could he have been hiding something all along? Despite all the theories, nothing in the case could definitively point to a solution. The mystery of Mary, Jesse, and Fanny Stewart remained unsolved, and the eerie disappearance haunted the community of Honeydew for years to come. The only concrete clue that had emerged was that small, personal item, the keychain with the letter M. Was it a clue to the family's whereabouts? Or was it a sign of something darker, something that no one could have ever predicted? As the case continued to remain cold, the strange and unnerving details surrounding the disappearance of the Stewart family became a local legend, one that would never be fully explained. The only thing that was certain was that Mary and her daughters had vanished without a trace, and the mystery they left behind would continue to haunt Northern California for generations. Part 5. The Darker Theories. What really happened? The years wore on, and as time dulled the sharp edge of urgency, the case of the missing Stewart family seemed to slip further into obscurity. The small community of Honeydew, Northern California, had grown accustomed to the mystery. Local residents whispered about the family and the strange circumstances surrounding their disappearance, but most had come to accept that they may never know the truth. The investigators, the volunteers, and the searchers had all done their best, but with no further evidence and no sightings, the case had become one of the many unsolved mysteries that lingered in the darker corners of the world. However, even in the absence of tangible answers, the theories continued to swirl. Every year, the mystery seemed to resurface in whispers. The community had all but given up hope, yet there were still those who would not let the Stewarts' disappearance be forgotten. As the years passed, new possibilities began to take shape, some plausible, some chilling. One theory particularly unsettling, gained traction in the years following the disappearance. This theory suggested that the Stewarts had not disappeared by accident. The keychain, now a well-known clue in the case, held more weight than anyone could have guessed. It was unique, personal. Could it have been planted deliberately? What if someone had wanted the Stewarts to vanish, not just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but because they had been targeted specifically? As investigators dug deeper into the lives of the Stewart family, they uncovered details about Mary and Byron's relationship that painted a darker picture. Neighbors and locals remembered moments of tension, arguments, and incidents that hinted at a relationship on the verge of breaking. Byron's reputation as a hot-tempered man was well known in the town, and over the years, it was suggested that Mary may have been the victim of abuse, though no one could say for certain. Could it be that she had been trying to escape? Was the disappearance a desperate attempt to free herself and her children from Byron's grip? One theory suggested that Mary had planned her own disappearance. Maybe she had become overwhelmed by the isolation of their rural homestead, the constant tension with her husband, and the emotional toll it was taking on her. She had been living in a remote, off-the-grid life, and perhaps she was seeking an escape, a fresh start, far away from everything. She had told no one, not even Byron, that she was leaving, and maybe her trip to town was just a cover for her true intentions. If she had planned to leave, the disappearance would have been carefully orchestrated, with the keychain and her personal belongings being left behind as a means to leave clues, to make it look like an accident. The fact that the family's car had been abandoned without any sign of a struggle reinforced this theory. Mary had simply left with her children, never intending to return. But as much as this theory made sense in certain ways, it left so many unanswered questions. How did she make it that far into the woods without anyone noticing? How did she avoid being tracked by authorities or even by her husband? The idea of Mary orchestrating her own disappearance seemed unlikely given her lack of resources and the overwhelming isolation of the area. The more investigators dug into the theory, the more holes appeared, and soon it felt like a dead end. Another theory, far more chilling and sinister, began to emerge. It suggested that Mary, Jessie, and Fanny hadn't left voluntarily at all. This theory proposed that the family had been abducted, possibly by someone who had been watching them for weeks. The fact that their car was found on a remote logging road, miles from the route Mary would normally have taken, pointed to the possibility that someone had deliberately diverted them there. The idea of an abduction was further supported by the discovery of the keychain, a personal item that seemed to have been left intentionally. Could it be that the Stewarts had been lured into the woods by a predator who had planned their capture for months? Byron's increasing odd behavior only fueled this theory. Some believed that his erratic actions after the disappearance, his strange insistence that his family had been taken by extraterrestrials, were the result of guilt. The theory suggested that Byron had been involved in the disappearance, perhaps even unintentionally, but the trauma of losing his family had driven him to madness. His belief in an abduction by aliens could have been his way of rationalizing an inexplicable tragedy. After all, when the most obvious answers fail, the mind often seeks the strange and the otherworldly. However, no physical evidence could be linked to any of the possible suspects, including Byron. No traces of blood, no DNA, no fingerprints. The authorities were left with little to go on except speculation. The case went cold, and as the years passed, it seemed that the truth about what happened to the Stewarts was destined to remain buried in the same deep forests where their car had been abandoned. But even in the silence, some believed there was something more, something that no one could understand, A supernatural element, perhaps. An ancient presence that had stalked the lonely hills of Honeydew for centuries, waiting for the right moment to take. Could it be that the forests themselves were hiding a dark secret, something older than the town itself? Some of the more superstitious residents of Honeydew whispered of old, forgotten rituals, rituals tied to the land, to the trees that stretched high into the sky, and to the darkness that lingered beneath the forest floor. Could it be that Mary and her children had stumbled upon something ancient and forbidden? Had they discovered a truth about the land that no one was meant to know? As time wore on and new theories continued to surface, the Stewarts' story became something of a local legend. It was no longer just the tale of a family's mysterious disappearance, but a dark, strange riddle that no one could quite solve. Theories would rise, only to be overshadowed by more disturbing questions. Was it murder, kidnapping, an accident? Or was it something even darker, something that would never be understood? To this day, the disappearance of Mary, Jesse, and Fanny Stewart remains one of California's most haunting unsolved mysteries. It is a case that continues to stir unease, not just because of its chilling nature, but because of the darkness it leaves behind. A darkness that many still believe lurks in the woods of Honeydew, just waiting to be uncovered. And so, the question remains, what really happened to the Stewart family? Was their disappearance simply the result of bad luck and bad choices? Or was there something far more sinister at play? As the years go by, the mystery of the Stewarts' vanishing is destined to remain, an enigma wrapped in a shroud of silence, and the eerie truth that no one will ever truly know. Part 6. The Unsolved Enigma, New Leads and Frustrations. For over a decade, the case of the missing Stewart family remained unsolved. The mystery surrounding their disappearance lingered in the fog of Northern California, becoming more of an unsettling local legend than an active investigation. But as time passed, it wasn't just the small community of Honeydew that felt the weight of their absence. The case was reopened, the cold trail dusted off, and with new technology and a renewed sense of urgency, investigators hoped that the decades-long mystery might finally come to an end. The case was re-examined in the mid-2000s, and the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, after receiving a renewed request from the community and pressure from crime watchers, decided to look at the case with fresh eyes. With forensic tools that had improved significantly over the years, the search for answers became more thorough. This was not just a search for a mother and her two young daughters. It was an investigation into a haunting tragedy that had left a scar in the town, one that could be erased with the right breakthrough. Detectives revisited the old evidence, hoping to uncover something that had been overlooked in the past. They revisited the Stewart family's car, now largely forgotten but still sitting abandoned in the forest near the forgotten logging road. The car was the centerpiece of the case, and every inch of it had been meticulously combed through during the original investigation. However, as investigators revisited the vehicle with new forensic techniques, they discovered some anomalies that had escaped their attention decades before. The grocery bags and laundry still sat in the back of the red Opel station wagon. The family's belongings were just as they had been left, neatly packed, as if someone had simply forgotten to return to the car. The TV, which had been mysteriously repaired, stood in stark contrast to the mystery of what happened to the family. This detail, once seen as a curious coincidence, now stood out like a beacon. Investigators could not find any record of Mary Stewart ever visiting a repair shop in the area to have the television fixed, yet it had been done, and the TV was in perfect working condition. This alone suggested that the Stewarts may have encountered someone who might have been involved in their disappearance, and yet this person remained elusive, a shadow, never fully understood. The more they searched the area, the more perplexing it became. Despite all the resources now being used in the investigation, no footprints, no signs of a struggle, and no evidence of foul play were found near the car. The area surrounding the wagon remained eerily undisturbed, leaving the authorities to grapple with the eerie possibility that the Stewarts had disappeared without a trace and without explanation. Had they walked away from the car on their own? Had they simply vanished into thin air? Or was there another, darker force at play? A new layer of mystery emerged as investigators questioned Mary's husband, Byron Stewart, once again. In the years after the disappearance, Byron had become increasingly erratic. His story had changed. He had become obsessed with extraterrestrial theories, and his behavior had grown more bizarre. The sheriff's office sought to investigate his actions further, but in the years following Mary's disappearance, he had moved away from Honeydew, never giving authorities any clear answers. Byron had moved out of the area in the early 1980s, but it was in the years after that his mental health seemed to spiral. In the wake of his wife's and children's disappearance, he became fixated on the idea that his family had been abducted by aliens. This strange claim fueled much of the speculation, and to some, added fuel to the theory that Byron himself might have been involved in his family's disappearance. Some believed his strange behavior was an attempt to deflect attention away from his own potential role in their vanishing. Authorities, however, never found enough evidence to connect Byron to the case, and his actions only seemed to confirm that the truth remained out of reach. Byron eventually died in 1996, taking with him any secrets he might have held. His passing left the case stuck, and with no other leads, the Stewart family's fate remained an enigma. The case stayed closed, and the years passed until the 2000s, when rumors began to spread about the possibility of new evidence. An anonymous tip had come into the sheriff's office in 2009, an unsettling phone call from someone who claimed to know more about what had happened to the Stewart family. The call came from a woman who said she had seen a vehicle matching the description of the Stewart family's station wagon parked on the remote logging roads several years ago. Her statement, though vague and inconclusive, reignited some old fears in the town and prompted investigators to revisit the case once again. At this point, it was almost a routine, an investigation filled with dead ends and false leads. But some local residents of Honeydew, particularly those who lived near the logging roads where the family was last seen, still claimed to hear things at night, strange, unexplained sounds that echoed through the woods. Some whispered that the Stewarts had stumbled into something far darker than anyone had imagined, something hidden deep in the woods, waiting for the right people to uncover its secrets. As investigators and locals alike sifted through the theories, one particular possibility began to resonate more clearly: the idea that something or someone had been watching the Stewarts all along. What if their seemingly random disappearance was no accident? What if Mary and her children had been targeted? Had they been intentionally lured into the woods? Was there someone or something waiting for them there? There were whispers of strange figures seen at the outskirts of town, tales of travelers who had vanished without a trace, and rumors of other mysterious disappearances in the region. Was it possible that Mary, Jessie, and Fanny had been lured into a trap? The questions seemed endless, and with each passing year, it seemed that the answers were only further out of reach. The Stewart family's disappearance became less of a case and more of a legend. In Honeydew and the surrounding towns, the mystery persisted, becoming an eerie reminder of how the forest could swallow even the most ordinary lives without leaving a trace. With every year that passed, it seemed that the mystery surrounding the Stewarts, disappearance would never be solved. Was it an accident, a carefully planned escape, or was it something far more sinister, hidden beneath the surface of a quiet town and deep within the dark woods of Northern California? The truth, it seemed, was lost in the fog and the pines, and it remained there, waiting. The Stewart case is just one example of the hundreds of missing persons cases that remain unsolved to this day. In the end, it is the unknown, the unexplained, that keeps people coming back to try and uncover what really happened. And in the case of the Stewart family, it seems that whatever dark forces may have been at play in the forests of Honeydew, their story will always remain one of the most chilling and eerie mysteries in California's unsolved history. Until new evidence is found or someone speaks the truth, the mystery of what happened to Mary, Jesse, and Fanny Stewart will continue to haunt the town of Honeydew, and the unanswered questions will continue to linger in the quiet, watching the trees. Part 7. The final theory whispers from the forest. As the years passed and the case of the Stewart family's disappearance grew colder, whispers continued to circulate in the small, isolated town of Honeydew, deep in the redwood forests of Northern California. The unsettling silence that followed their disappearance only seemed to deepen the mystery. For those who still cared to remember, the Stewarts' story became more than just a case. It became a legend, a story told in hushed tones, passed from one local to another, and over time the details grew more vivid, more fantastical, and more chilling. But there was one theory that continued to surface, time and time again, in quiet conversations behind closed doors. It was the theory that, more than any other, seemed to bring together the pieces of the Stewart family's mysterious disappearance. A theory that, if true, would not only answer the long-standing questions, but would also add an element of terror that would leave the town's residents reeling. The theory was simple yet disturbing. What if the Stewarts had encountered something ancient, something that had been hidden in those woods for centuries? What if the Stewarts' disappearance was not an isolated event, but part of something darker, something supernatural? It began with the forest itself. Those who lived near the woods, especially those with long family histories in the area, spoke of an unnatural presence that had lingered for generations. Older residents shared stories of strange happenings in the deep woods, things they had never fully understood, things they couldn't explain. There were tales of unsettling visions, of figures seen between the trees, of eerie voices on the wind, and of people who ventured into the forest, never to return. Some of the stories, though dismissed by outsiders, hinted at something much darker, an old legend that had been passed down for centuries. The legend spoke of an ancient cult that once roamed the land, a cult that practiced rituals deep in the forest, using the thick trees and the inescapable fog to hide their dark deeds. The cult was believed to have worshipped ancient, otherworldly beings, beings whose influence stretched far beyond the earth itself. The cult's followers were said to have disappeared centuries ago, their practices forgotten by the outside world. But was it possible, some speculated, that they never really left? Over the years, a few locals had whispered that there were still those who followed the old ways, even if they didn't advertise it. A quiet, shadowy group that lived just beyond the reach of modern society, hidden deep within the forests, keeping to themselves, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves again. According to the whispers, these new followers had taken the Stewarts as part of some ancient, twisted ritual, a ritual that called for offerings to the gods of the forest, offerings that could only be made by the most unsuspecting of travelers. Could the Stewart family have been the victims of such a group? It was impossible to say, but the theory continued to fester, growing darker with each passing year. The evidence was scant, but it was the strange circumstances surrounding the Stewart's car that gave some credence to this terrifying theory. The location of the abandoned red Opel station wagon, half hidden on a forgotten logging road, far off the beaten path, was suspicious in itself. No one could understand why Mary Stewart, a woman known for her practicality, would have ventured down such a treacherous, out-of-the-way road when there were more well-known routes to town. Had she been guided there? Was it possible that the road, long forgotten by most, held significance to those who lived deep within the forest? And then there was the television. The bizarre, inexplicable repair of the family's portable television added an unsettling layer to the mystery. No shop in the region had repaired it, yet it was fixed and in working condition when discovered in the car. How had it been repaired? Who had done it? And what had they done to Mary Stewart and her children after they visited the unknown repairman? The inexplicable repair became a haunting symbol of something that had gone wrong, of a connection to forces far outside the realm of ordinary human explanation. Investigators, too, had noted the eerie silence that surrounded the discovery of the family's car. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no shattered glass, just an empty car surrounded by an impenetrable, watching forest. No footprints led away from the car, no tracks in the mud or leaves. It was as if the Stewarts had simply vanished into the trees, as if they had been absorbed into the very landscape itself, leaving behind only the remnants of their mundane lives. The scene was a strange snapshot of a journey interrupted, but there was no evidence of where the Stewarts had gone or who, if anyone, had been involved. Then there was the chilling detail that no one could shake. Mary Stewart's purse and belongings had been left behind, untouched. Why? It was a detail that never made sense. If they had abandoned the car voluntarily, why leave everything behind, including money and personal effects? Was it possible that they had been taken against their will? Or worse, was it possible that they had been lured into the forest, never to be seen again? One investigator, during the course of the reopened case in the 2000s, suggested that the entire incident might have been a carefully orchestrated abduction. But this theory didn't fit neatly with the lack of signs of a struggle and the unexplained nature of the family's final movements. The notion that the Stewarts had been drawn into the forest by something beyond human control, something supernatural or otherworldly, seemed to make more sense to some of the local residents, people who had heard the strange stories and who still believed that something ancient and dark lingered in the deep woods. As the decades passed and the case went cold, the story of the Stewarts became less about the facts and more about the legend that grew around their disappearance. In the minds of those who lived in and around Honeydew, the family's vanishing became an eerie symbol of the forest's power, a reminder that some places were not meant to be understood, and that some mysteries would never be solved. Even now, in 2023, the town of Honeydew and the surrounding forests of Humboldt County remain haunted by the questions that were never answered. The Stewart family, Mary, Jesse, and Fanny, remain lost, their fates a chilling unknown, their disappearance forever intertwined with the whispers of the forest. Was it a group of deranged individuals who had taken them? Or was it something much darker, a ritual, an ancient practice, or even an otherworldly force that chose them as its next victims? We may never know the full truth, but the unanswered questions continue to gnaw at the collective conscience of the small town of Honeydew. And the legend of the Stewart family, their lives interrupted in a remote corner of Northern California, remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the 20th century. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. The Stewart case is one of them. Perhaps that is why it continues to haunt the forests of Honeydew, where the trees stand tall, silent, and ever watchful, waiting for the next unwitting travelers to stumble upon the dark and inexplicable forces hidden within the shadows. Part 8. The Return to the Forest, Unseen Forces Stirring. It was the winter of 2009, when the latest unsettling chapter in the Stewart family's mysterious disappearance began to unfold. As the years had passed, the small town of Honeydew had, in many ways, moved on. The forest remained as thick and foreboding as ever, but with the advent of modern technology, many had hoped that the mystery would fade into the background, becoming nothing more than a local legend. But some stories have a way of returning, like an itch you can't scratch. For those who had been involved in the search and those who still lived in Honeydew, the case had never quite left their minds. The case was reopened by local authorities after decades of silence, with the Humboldt County District Attorney's Office claiming they had new leads, new evidence that they needed to examine. Though many of the locals were hesitant to stir the pot, the investigation took on a new life. This time, the team was made up of fresh faces, younger investigators determined to solve a case that had stumped the community for so long. The first strange thing happened when the old surveyor's crew, which had discovered the Stewarts' abandoned station wagon all those years ago, came forward with a chilling confession. One of the men had kept something from the authorities back in 1978. It had been buried in his mind for decades, but the nightmares had returned, and so, now, he felt compelled to speak. He had told no one about what he saw that day, a shadow that followed him, silent and swift, lurking between the redwoods as he approached the station wagon. He had only glanced at it once, thinking it to be nothing more than a trick of the light, a figment of the vast wilderness playing on his mind. But it was the way it moved, unnaturally, almost as though it was sliding rather than walking, that had made his heart seize with terror. The shadow vanished as quickly as it appeared, blending seamlessly with the thick forest. After years of silence, the old surveyor was convinced that the shadow had been more than just an apparition. It was something real, something that had been there when they discovered the car. And with that revelation, a sense of dread began to settle over the new investigation. The old man had always thought it was nothing, a trick of the light, until his nightmares began to haunt him each time he closed his eyes. Now, after all these years, he feared that what he had seen that day was connected to the very disappearance of the Stewart family. When local authorities began digging deeper into the Stewart case, there was something unsettling about the forest itself, an energy that was hard to explain. The fog that rolled in each morning and evening seemed to hold a more sinister presence than it once did. Investigators remarked that it was as if the trees themselves were watching, listening. A palpable tension hung in the air, thick and heavy, like something dormant, something ancient was waking. One cold morning in December, while combing through old records, a researcher found a peculiar piece of information buried deep within local archives. A journal entry from a forest ranger, written in 1946, described an eerie event that had occurred during a routine patrol of the area near Honeydew. The ranger mentioned a mysterious gathering in the forest, a group of individuals wearing dark, tattered robes, their faces hidden. He'd never seen them again, but he wrote that the group had appeared to be performing a ritual, chanting in a language that no one could understand. The journal entry described the sensation of being watched, an unshakable feeling of dread, and it was the last entry the ranger made before resigning from his position. The discovery of the journal was the spark that reignited old rumors about the so-called cult that had been rumored to exist in the area for centuries. Some of the older residents of Honeydew had heard whispers about strange rites and sacrifices taking place deep within the forest, especially near the abandoned logging roads. Could the Stewarts have unknowingly stumbled into the path of something far darker than just an isolated group of criminals? Had they been caught in the ancient rituals of a cult that still inhabited the forest's deepest corners? As investigators continued their search, they began to uncover signs of activity. Small symbols carved into the bark of trees, twisted branches arranged in unnatural formations, and strange markings on rocks. It was as if the land itself was calling to something, beckoning it closer. The forest, which had always been a quiet and secluded part of Humboldt County, seemed to have a life of its own. The air felt colder now, and the trees seemed to bend and creak as if they were alive, aware of the attention they were receiving. Strange occurrences began to unfold around the investigation. The team reported hearing unexplained sounds during their overnight stays, footsteps just beyond their campsite, faint whispers that would fade the moment they turned to listen. One investigator swore he saw a figure standing among the trees one night, tall and thin, almost as if it were part of the forest itself. It was as if the shadows were blending into human form, creeping ever closer. The most unnerving part, however, came when the investigators started receiving phone calls. Late at night, when the house was quiet, someone would pick up the phone, and on the other end would be nothing but heavy breathing. The calls always came at the same time, around 3 a.m., and the person on the other end would remain silent, just breathing, for several minutes before abruptly hanging up. One investigator, more skeptical than the rest, laughed it off as a prank, until he too began to hear strange sounds outside his window at night. The growls and rustling of something large in the woods, something that wasn't quite human. He'd dismiss it as the wind or animals, but the feeling of being watched would never leave him. Each time he stepped outside, it felt as if the trees were closing in around him, suffocating him in their silent embrace. It was one of the team members who stumbled upon something truly chilling, a photograph. In the attic of an old house that had once belonged to a friend of the Stewarts, they found an old photograph tucked inside a dusty envelope. The picture showed a group of people gathered around a bonfire deep in the woods, their faces obscured by shadow. The investigator had an unsettling realization. The photograph had been taken the same year the Stewarts went missing, and the location was disturbingly close to the spot where the Stewarts' car had been found. Something darker was at play here, something that couldn't be explained away by logic or reason. The deeper they dug, the more they found, not just evidence of an ancient cult, but whispers of something older still. A force that had always been there in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. As winter turned to spring and the investigation moved into its second year, the forest seemed to grow more restless. The investigators who had been closest to the case began to experience strange dreams, visions of the Stewarts, calling out to them from deep within the woods. But when they woke, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The quiet peace of the forest, once so calming, now felt suffocating. The fear began to grow. Were the Stewarts' disappearances tied to something more than just a cult? Had they too become part of the forest's curse, lost to the ancient force that called this land home? The mystery of the Stewarts' disappearance, once a cold case, now seemed to pulse with an unsettling life of its own. The forest's grip on Honeydew tightened with each passing day, and the investigators, each one drawn into its web, began to realize that some answers may not be meant to be found. The Stewarts had become a part of something far bigger than just a missing persons case. They were woven into the fabric of the forest itself, victims of forces both ancient and malevolent, forces that would never let them go. And in the shadows of Honeydew, the whispers of the past waited to claim more. Part 9. The Silent Witnesses, Echoes of the Forest. The mystery of the Stewart family's disappearance seemed to grow more complex with each passing day. But as the months dragged on, a chilling realization began to settle over the investigation. The search had expanded beyond the small town of Honeydew and reached further into the eerie silence of the redwood forests that sprawled across Humboldt County. What the investigators had uncovered was not just a story of a family lost, but of something far older, something that had been waiting for generations, biding its time. As the investigation deepened, more peculiar details began to surface. For one, local folklore that had once seemed to be nothing more than superstition started to gain more weight. Whispered tales of the Watchers were becoming impossible to ignore. The town's elders spoke of an ancient forest spirit, something that existed long before settlers came to Humboldt County, a force that lived within the trees, manipulating the land and the people who dared to tread too deeply. Many had dismissed these legends as mere fairy tales meant to frighten children, but now they were hard to ignore. The more the investigators uncovered, the more they were drawn into this web of myth and reality. One night, an investigator named Colin was reviewing old forestry records when he stumbled across something that made his blood run cold. Hidden among the records of local logging activity was an old map, one that was not part of any official archives. It showed several marked areas deep within the woods, areas that were eerily consistent with the paths the Stewart family might have taken that fateful day. The map indicated hidden clearings, forgotten trails, and markings that seemed to suggest places where the Watchers might congregate. It was an unsettling discovery, one that hinted at an ancient and deeply rooted presence within the forest. For the first time in the investigation, the chilling possibility loomed large that the Stewarts may not have simply disappeared. They might have been led to a place they were never meant to leave. One of the most striking pieces of evidence came when the team returned to the location of the Stewart family's car. With a new perspective and more knowledge of the strange occurrences surrounding the case, they began to inspect the area more thoroughly. What they found was disturbing. They had combed the area multiple times, but this time, they noticed something that had eluded them before: a series of irregularly shaped markings on several of the surrounding trees. The symbols, crudely etched into the bark, appeared to be a mixture of known indigenous markings and strange, foreign symbols that resembled those seen in the journal from the old forest ranger from the 1940s. Some of these symbols were similar to those found in the so-called ritualistic gatherings mentioned in the folklore. Could these be linked to the ancient cult that had been rumored to dwell in the area? The investigators noted that the markings were deliberately placed along the path the Stewarts would have taken to the logging road. One of the symbols, etched in a particularly large and ancient oak tree, looked almost like a portal, a circular shape with jagged lines cutting through the center. It was as if the tree itself had been marked to guide someone or something toward a specific location, as if it were an entrance into another realm. The eerie part of this discovery was that, even though these symbols seemed to be etched into the trees decades ago, they appeared far too fresh, as though they had been retouched very recently. The atmosphere in the forest had shifted. The air felt thicker, oppressive, and the deeper they ventured into the wilderness, the more they were aware of the strange, unnerving silence that hung over everything. Birds had stopped chirping. Even the wind, which had been a constant companion throughout their journey, had ceased its usual murmuring. It was as if the forest itself had paused, holding its breath. Late one night, just as the team was preparing to leave the site, one of the investigators, Alice, noticed something out of the corner of her eye. At first, she thought it was just the reflection of her flashlight on a nearby tree, but then she realized it was something much more unsettling. It was a figure, A tall, thin shadow standing motionless between the trees, barely visible under the cover of night. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was a trick of the light or if her mind was playing tricks on her, but the figure seemed too real to ignore. The other investigators, hearing Alice's gasp, turned to look, but the figure was gone. In its place stood nothing but the dark silhouette of the trees, stretching high into the sky. The sight of the figure sent a chill down Alice's spine, one that would not be shaken. It was as if she had seen something that was never meant to be seen, a presence, lingering just beyond the reach of the living, part of the very fabric of the forest. The unease began to grow among the investigators. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the Stewarts' disappearance was not an isolated incident. The same eerie, unsettling atmosphere had plagued the area for decades. Whispers of other disappearances, other strange sightings, started to surface in the town's history. No one spoke about it openly, but some of the older residents quietly admitted that they, too, had witnessed unexplained phenomena, things that had driven people to leave the area in fear. As they continued their search, the investigators began to hear faint whispers in the wind, the kind that sounded like voices but were impossible to understand. Sometimes they would hear them while sitting in their camp, their tents vibrating slightly with the intensity of the sounds. The whispers would stop abruptly as though someone, or something, was watching them, waiting. As the investigation grew more intense, the nightmarish feeling that had taken root in the team's minds seemed to spread. They couldn't shake the sensation that the forest itself was watching them, pulling them deeper into its grasp. The very air seemed charged with an unseen energy, an energy that made their every movement feel like an intrusion. One evening, as the team sat around their campfire discussing their findings, the wind began to pick up. It swirled through the trees, howling like a distant, mournful cry. Suddenly, there was a rustle in the bushes nearby. The investigators turned their flashlights toward the sound, but once again, there was nothing. They laughed it off nervously, trying to reassure themselves that it was just the wind. But the unease lingered, hanging over them like a dark cloud. As they prepared to head back to town, they realized that the mystery of the Stewarts was not just a case to be solved. It was a story that was still unfolding, still reaching out from the shadows of the forest, pulling them further into its dark embrace. The investigators had ventured too far into the woods, and now the woods had claimed them too. As they left the clearing, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that the trees were watching them leave. She turned around one last time, half expecting to see the shadowy figure standing among the trees. But there was nothing. The forest had swallowed it all, leaving nothing but the unsettling silence in its wake. For now, the Stewarts remained lost, their mystery still unsolved, buried under the weight of the forest's secrets. The whispers would continue, but only the trees knew the truth. Part 10. The Final Silence, the Forest's Secret. As the investigation into the Stewart family's disappearance dragged on, it became clear that something more sinister than mere human malice had intervened. With each step further into the dark heart of the Humboldt County forests, the investigators found themselves being pulled deeper into an enigma that didn't just involve a missing family. It involved something ancient, something that had long existed beyond the reach of time, and something that was far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The clues they had found, the strange symbols etched into the trees, the unexplainable whispering winds, the unsettling figures glimpsed in the darkness, began to weave together into something that was both terrifying and unfathomable. The deeper they delved, the more it became evident that the forest itself was alive, as if it were protecting its secrets and guarding its inhabitants from prying eyes. It was an ancient, sentient presence that had witnessed the passing of generations and would not allow any interruption to its sacred silence. Alice, the investigator who had first seen the shadowy figure among the trees, found herself increasingly troubled by a gnawing sense of dread. She couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had been aware of them from the moment they set foot on its soil. There were moments, fleeting and almost imperceptible, when she could feel eyes upon her, cold, calculating, unblinking eyes that had been watching them from the shadows. On one particularly cold and foggy morning, Alice ventured deeper into the woods, hoping to find some final clue that might explain the mysterious disappearance of the Stewarts. The others in the team had reluctantly followed, but there was a palpable unease hanging in the air. No one spoke as they trekked through the dense foliage, the muffled crunch of their boots the only sound breaking the silence. As they reached the edge of a dense thicket, Alice stopped dead in her tracks. Ahead of her was a clearing she had not seen before, a place that seemed eerily familiar, as if she had been here in another life. The ground was covered in dead leaves, and the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. But it wasn't the clearing that sent chills down her spine. It was the object in the center of the clearing. A large, weathered stone stood in the middle of the space, worn by time but still commanding an unsettling presence. Carved into its surface were the same symbols they had seen on the trees, symbols that matched the ones from the map Colin had found. It was almost as if the stone had been placed there specifically for the team to discover, as though it had been waiting, patient, for them to come. Alice felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to touch the stone. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the cold surface. The moment her skin made contact, the ground beneath her seemed to shift, a deep rumble emanating from the earth itself. It was as though the forest had come alive, responding to her touch. The air grew heavy, and the trees surrounding them groaned as if they were stretching, awakening from a long slumber. Suddenly, Alice was struck by a vision, a flash of light so bright it nearly blinded her. In that brief moment, she saw the Stewarts, not as they had been, but as shadows, figures lost in the mist, moving through the trees as if they were one with the forest. She saw Mary, her face hollow and drained of life, her eyes wide with fear, and the two girls, Jessie and Fanny, clutching at their mother, but all of them moving in slow motion, as though trapped in some otherworldly dimension. The vision was gone in an instant, and Alice stumbled back, gasping for breath. The others looked at her with concern, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't find the words to describe what she had just seen. It was as though the forest had shown her a glimpse of what had truly happened to the Stewarts. They had not simply disappeared. They had been absorbed into the forest, claimed by its ancient forces, trapped in a place beyond time. Alice could feel the presence of something ancient around her, something that had existed long before the first settlers arrived in California. It wasn't just the trees that were alive. It was the entire forest, an entity that was both beautiful and terrifying, as if it held the secrets of the earth itself. And now the Stewarts were a part of it. The investigators left the clearing in a daze, their minds swirling with the implications of what Alice had seen. The stone, the symbols, the vision, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. The Stewarts had not been lost. They had been taken, drawn into a world that existed just beneath the surface of reality, a world that was older and darker than anything they could comprehend. But the worst part was that they were not alone. The forest had claimed them, and now it was calling to the investigators as well. Alice felt a growing sense of dread as they made their way back to camp. She knew they had uncovered the truth, but they had also uncovered something far worse, something that was still watching them, waiting for them to make the same mistake that the Stewarts had. The team returned to the clearing one last time, determined to finish what they had started. But when they arrived, the stone was gone. The clearing was empty, as if nothing had ever been there. It was as though the forest had erased all evidence of their discovery, leaving nothing behind but the unsettling silence. The investigation into the disappearance of the Stewarts was officially closed that day. No more leads, no more clues. The case was left unresolved, but the mystery of the forest, of the ancient, powerful force that had claimed the family, remained. And so, the silence grew louder. The forest had swallowed the Stewarts and the investigators, and it would continue to hold its secrets. To this day, the haunting memory of the family's disappearance lingers, woven into the very fabric of the redwoods. The whispers of the past, the shadows of those lost in the forest, can still be heard by those who dare to venture too deep. And in the silence of the forest, the secrets remain, forever waiting, forever hidden. The Stewart family's story may have ended, but the forest's story is far from over. The story of the Stewart family's disappearance is one of the most chilling and unresolved mysteries of Northern California's Humboldt County. A quiet family, Mary Stewart, her two daughters Jessie and Fanny, and her husband Byron, lived off the grid in the wilderness, far away from the hustle and bustle of urban life. For a while, life seemed simple and peaceful in their little homestead in Honeydew, a rural town nestled among the towering redwoods. But everything changed when Mary set out on a routine trip to town with her children, and they never came back. What began as an ordinary errand run on December 10th, 1977, took a turn into the unknown when Mary and the girls vanished without a trace. Their car, a red Opel station wagon, was found abandoned in the woods, its contents undisturbed. Groceries, laundry, and even a recently repaired television were left in the vehicle, as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The gas line had been severed, leaving the car inoperable, but there were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood, or even footprints in the surrounding woods. The mystery of the Stewarts haunted the community for years. Despite extensive searches by both local authorities and volunteers, no trace of Mary or her children was ever found. The case baffled investigators and spawned countless theories, each darker and more unsettling than the last. Was it a voluntary disappearance, a tragic end brought on by a sudden mental break, or was there something far more sinister at play, something linked to the strange symbols found in the woods? Some even speculated that the family had been taken by an unknown force, an ancient presence that had been lurking in the redwood forests for centuries. Over time, theories swirled, but the truth remained elusive. Mary's husband, Byron, became the focus of the investigation, given his volatile temperament and strange behavior in the weeks following their disappearance. But no concrete evidence ever pointed to him, and he continued to insist that his family had been abducted by extraterrestrials, a claim that only deepened suspicions about his involvement. Yet, after years of being the prime suspect, Byron's own death in 1996 left the case without closure. The chilling reality of the Stewart family's disappearance is that it may never be solved. The forest, once a symbol of their refuge and freedom, became the place that swallowed them whole, and to this day, the haunting mystery remains unsolved. What happened to them? Did they fall victim to something beyond our understanding, or did they simply vanish, leaving no trace? But this story also carries profound lessons. The disappearance of the Stewart family teaches us about the thin line between peace and peril in our lives. The family's off-grid existence, initially a dream of simplicity and freedom, ultimately led them to the heart of a mystery that would never be unraveled. The idea of escaping to a secluded, peaceful life, far removed from the chaos of society, is a desire many of us share. But sometimes, escaping the noise of the world comes at a cost. The forest that offered the Stewarts refuge also became a dark, silent witness to their disappearance. What can we learn from this? First, we are reminded that life is unpredictable. We can never truly escape all of life's dangers, no matter how remote we try to make ourselves. Whether in the woods, in the city, or anywhere in between, danger is a constant part of the human experience. The Stewart story is a reminder that no matter how careful we think we are, something beyond our control can alter our fate in an instant. Additionally, we learn about the dangers of isolation. The Stewarts lived off the grid, cut off from the world, and yet their story shows us that such isolation can sometimes lead to the unknown, and the unknown can be far more dangerous than we could ever imagine. In today's world, it's important to balance our need for solitude with the necessity of connection. Relationships, community, and communication are key to keeping us grounded and safe. The Stewart's fate, if anything, highlights the importance of being aware of our surroundings and ensuring we're not cutting ourselves off from help when we need it most. Moreover, the Stewart family's disappearance teaches us about the power of the unknown. The eerie symbols, the ghostly figure in the forest, and the strange occurrences surrounding their vanishing leave us with more questions than answers. Sometimes there are forces in the world, be they natural, supernatural, or simply unknown, that we cannot comprehend. The unknown can be both a source of fear and fascination, and it's crucial that we face it with humility and respect. The Stewart story invites us to consider the unseen, the unexplained, and the mysterious, and to remember that sometimes the answers to life's deepest mysteries may never be known. But at the heart of this story lies a fundamental truth. The disappearance of the Stewart family serves as a powerful reminder that we are all vulnerable. No matter how carefully we plan our lives, no matter how isolated or protected we think we are, something beyond our control can always alter the course of our existence. The fear of the unknown, the feeling of being watched, and the inexplicable nature of their vanishing are universal fears that we all share. And yet, this story also serves as a testament to the strength of human resilience. Despite the unsolved mystery, the Stewart story endures in our collective consciousness, a symbol of our eternal quest for answers and our deep-seated fear of the unknown. Now, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think happened to the Stewart family? Do you think they were victims of foul play, or was there something far darker at work in those woods? Do you believe in the possibility of forces beyond our understanding? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation and explore this chilling mystery together. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about unsolved mysteries, chilling disappearances, and eerie true crime tales, make sure to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark. Your support helps us bring more terrifying, thought-provoking content to you every week. Thank you for being part of this community, and stay tuned for more spine-tingling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.